All right, welcome to the second video in chapter number 4. We are going to talk about the next two questions in the guide of reading. Those are questions 4 and 5. Questions like, what were some of the characteristics of backcountry life? We talked a little bit about backcountry life in the last video. We're going to delve into that topic a little bit more. Then we're going to take our attention elsewhere from the backcountry to those more populated seaport cities. We're going to talk about what life was like there, including kind of who had the power and who did not have the power. So you're going to want to make sure to catch that. It's always a lot of good stuff. So let's talk about a little bit about the backcountry. The backcountry was isolated. Like, you did not see people in the backcountry. Like, on a day-to-day basis, there's a better than average chance you were not going to see another human being. Which led to some, just a different way of life. Now, that isolation meant that, again, I don't see my neighbors. If I wanted to go to the store, again, I got to make it worth my while because this is a long trip in. It's like a day's worth of traveling to get to the store to buy something you needed. So if you went to the store and then came home and said, "Oh, I forgot to buy a shovel," you're kind of out of luck. It's a long trip back. So it took a while to get to the city to go to the store or to go to a church. Like, that was, again, too far away to really go to church. Now, they had religion. But because they lived in isolation and not really a lot of other people around, at least in close proximity, it was tough to gather people in a central location. So it was tough to have any organized religion. People were religious, but just not necessarily in an organized fashion. There was a lack of markets because, let's face it, if I don't see people on a day-to-day basis, who would I sell my products to? So there was a lack of markets. Because of a lack of markets, that led to what we call subsistence level farming. Usually I'm growing products for my family. So if I grow a field of corn and wheat or whatever I have in my fields, that's what we eat for the year. Now, there might be a little bit of trading that goes on. They might grow a little bit of excess where they do kind of set aside a day to take the excess into town and maybe sell that off for a little bit of money so they can buy things like, shovels or whatever they need. But for the most part, they sustain themselves through what they grew. They were uneducated. Again, schools, it was tough to have a school around because, there's just not people. So they were uneducated for the most part. They weren't very civilized. They had relationships before they married. So they, as the book called it, they mated before they married. So take that for what you will. They were not very civilized in that there was a lot of brawling that went on. When they did run into people, there was, a fight at the drop of a hat. They were hard workers. They were very, very hard workers, again, because you had to kind of fend for yourself. Now, a lot of people say, in the backcountry or on the frontier, this was one of the more equitable distribution of power between men and women because they were working kind of arm in arm, doing a lot of the same similar work. Like, there was not as much women and men's work per se. I mean, women probably would be the ones that would cook, but at the same time, they were also out working the fields and that sort of thing as well, Because of that, and we're going to see this further along, when we talk about women getting the right to vote, which won't be for a little while. The frontier women get the vote, get the right to vote first. The states on the frontier are like, hey, women do just the same things as men do. They have a little bit more, so they had a little bit more say as opposed to getting the right to vote first. Now, there is some conflicts. On the frontier and in the backcountry, there are some conflicts. I'm going to talk about a group called the Paxton Boys. If I can ever find the slide. There we go. I'm talking a little bit about the Paxton Boys. There's this group in Pennsylvania that just does not like the government. They're very frustrated. And this is not just an isolated incident in Pennsylvania. This really happens in Virginia, the Carolinas. We'll talk about Ethan Allen down here in New York and Vermont. But people that live kind of in the back country, that I guess the generic claim is they're just not heard by their government. They kind of move out there and they're isolated, and they're really just not very well represented. The Paxton Boys, their big grief was they felt like the government didn't protect them from Native Americans. So they did what they felt they had to do. They took up arms. They went out, they kind of fought the Indians themselves, then they kind of marched to Philadelphia with their guns and said, hey, you're not taking care of us. We had people called regulators in North Carolina and South Carolina, their big beef was there was no official justice, meaning they had to pay these huge fees if they wanted to be part of the judicial system. It was expensive to get lawyers. It was expensive to bring something to trial. So they didn't like that they had to make these huge treks in to a courthouse that was, again, maybe a day's worth of travel away. So they didn't feel like they were represented. They didn't feel like they were represented in their city council, their city assemblies. So they didn't have a lot of say in what was going on in their government. And they felt like they were unduly taxed. People that lived in the backcountry didn't feel like they were getting a lot of bang for their buck, I guess, so to speak, as the saying goes. So they felt like their taxes weren't going to anything that showed any kind of tangible gain for themselves. Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys, again, a similar story. They moved into the area of Vermont, who New York tried to kind of govern as their own. They're like, hey, we'll set up a court for you. We'll do this stuff for you. Here's our laws. You got to follow those. And Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys are like, we already set up a court on our own. We're pretty good. So, again, there's all these conflicts that are kind of breaking out. And they're not huge conflicts by any means. But they are, kind of a growing discontent between the two different parts of the states. There's ethnic conflicts because there's different groups, whether it's religious or, again, people coming in from Germany or France or wherever they're coming from, Spain, Ireland. So there's a lot of people that have some ethnic conflicts as well. All right, let's shift our attention a little bit to those bigger cities on the East Coast, those seaport cities. And there is a little bit of a hierarchy in seaport life, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. It's probably important to note, just as a matter of just being factual, this is not an official list. There is a lot of countries that do have an official hierarchy. They call it a caste system, where literally the government will put you in and say hey, this is the group that gets the most. This is the one that gets the second most, and you guys are at the bottom. The United States, we don't have one now. We never have in the past. That's never really been something that we've had in the United States. Now we do tend to put ourselves into classes. You've probably heard a lot of people say hey, that's upper class, or he's lower class, or middle class. Most people tend to say they're middle class. But we don't really have an official class system. Now, in the seaport cities, what we kind of say, when we say hey, they're at the top of the hierarchy, we kind of mean because of power, because of money, and the commercial class would be the group that would rank at the top. People that were traders or merchants, they made the most money. They tended to have the most political power, have the most say in kind of the assemblies. They took the leadership roles. They tended to rank at the top of the hierarchy system. Next would be the skilled craft workers or artisans. So your blacksmiths, people that kind of made something. That would be the next level. After that would be those that filled basic needs, like bakers or cobblers or tavern owners, shop owners. They tended to be next. And then kind of at the bottom of the hierarchy would be your free and bound workers. So what we mean by free workers is I can get up and leave whenever I want. I'm a free man, and I'm going to go work in your shop. I'm the one that stocks the shelves, or, I help you bake the bread, or whatever it is that I do. But I'm free to leave whenever I want. And then there's those bound workers, like indentured servants, where, I might not like baking bread, but I've got to stay because I'm bound by a contract that I signed that I have to stay. And then we have slaves. We do see slavery in the 1700s in the North. I think that's something that really isn't said very often. Now, it's not the wide-scale slavery of plantations, but it is slavery. There's usually somebody would have hey, I need somebody to work in my shop to help me as a blacksmith. So they would usually they would buy a single slave, or maybe they'd buy a slave maybe, part of the commercial class because I want somebody to act as a servant in my home. That's usually what you'd see kind of slavery or slaves used for in the North. Now, a tradition in West Africa that a lot of West Africans had was something called Negro Election Day. And we see this in the North. For a day, the owners of slaves generally would kind of set aside and let their slaves kind of gather and conduct what's called Negro Election Day, where they would have like somebody would get elected like the Black King, or kind of like almost like a judicial system where they would settle disputes in the community between blacks and whites. So that was a little bit of an interesting thing that really doesn't go on in any other part of the country. Women in cities had a pretty different role depending on your social class. So if I'm like wealthy women in northern cities really had a pretty luxurious life because they had a lot of slaves, or they had not a lot of slaves, but they would maybe have a slave or an indentured servant around to do the bulk of the work. So you had kind of a little bit of a leisurely life. You didn't really have a lot of responsibility that more working women had. So if you had like a family that was kind of the next rung down on the hierarchy, now maybe they had to help their husbands in the shop, or you had that traditional work of like staying in the home, like cooking and cleaning and that sort of thing. And then obviously there is kind of that last one where people, we have women that are forced to go out and work. That it's not like you have to go find a job. Maybe they have to be the servants in the wealthy homes because they need to add to the income of their families. That happens, or they were single women, that sort of thing. Entertainment. We do see entertainment, a lot more entertainment in the cities than we do in the backcountry places. Now we do see like taverns, so you can go to a local tavern. There is, like a lot of men would do that. There was cockfighting. That was kind of a big thing. So you'd see like different entertainment thing, like shows. Maybe there would be a touring English company that would put on a play or something. So there's a little more entertainment opportunities out there. In the cities, you also see a bigger risk for people, particularly at the top of the hierarchy, where they risk their investments. Maybe there's accidents, or ships sink or something that has other products on it. So you do see kind of a little more of a risk. And you do see social conflicts. Again, there's a lot of people that gather in the cities, a lot of people from different, a lot of different ethnic backgrounds, a lot of different religions. And then you do see some people that have a little animosity particularly when the economy goes south and is kind of struggling. You do see a lot of people that turn on the merchants and the commercial class. Like, hey, why you've got a lot of money and times are tough, and a lot of people would come into conflict with that sort of thing. You also see people that will confront others that they deem less valuable. Now that would be, politicians that they don't hold in high regard. That could be part of those. Somebody they feel like maybe has intimidated or, maybe done a wrong to somebody. Prostitutes sometimes fell into this category of, somebody that we don't look at, or the society didn't look at as a positive contributor. So sometimes there was some vile kind of contention thrown their way as well. Okay, I will see you in a bit, going over kind of the next part of this. So if you have any questions, just let me know.